Ayy, look, yeah, ayy. I'm in the lab like Dexter, brand new batch he tested. I'm with all the extras, don't try and bitch, I'm pressure. I'm the type to step on steppers, I'm the type to step on steppers. I'm the type to step on steppers, I'm the type to step on steppers.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the New Media Podcast. I'm your host, Ya. We hope you enjoyed the last episode. But as always, today's going to be an even better episode. Of course, as you guys can all see, I got the whole crew with me. Everybody's in the house today. And today, it's real simple, man. We're back. We're here to talk about the NBA Finals. The Dallas Mavericks and the Boston Celtics dueled it out for 5 games, and your 2024 NBA champions are none other than the Boston Celtics. And so in today's episode, the agenda is going to be pretty simple. We're just going to be talking simply about the series, our thoughts, going throughout the whole series, and a lot of the conversations that have come about from this specific series. But with that being said, before we jump into all of that, temperature check, how's everybody doing?
I mean, doing well. I don't think, anybody outside of Massachusetts is happy Boston won the NBA Finals, but all season long, I think anybody who wasn't biased or thought about the Boston Celtics in previous seasons had a feeling that this team was going to win the championship just because of how good they were. And it went exactly how I thought it was. I predicted these guys would leave the playoffs with less than 4 losses, and that's pretty much exactly what they did. I mean, they're pretty dominant. Yes, I think it was an injury-ridden postseason, but, they got the job done. That's just the reality, and I don't think anybody's too happy about it, but it is what it is. You just had to accept it.
Yeah, the best team throughout the season, 64-win team that was pretty much healthy throughout the season and playoffs came out and dominated in a dominated fashion. So, it wasn't pretty much expected. They came out, they hooped, but, we'll dive into it more. I'm a big Lakers fan, so, it's fuck the Celtics. It's really fuck the Celtics.
Yeah, man, 16 years in the works since their last banner. The Boston Celtics were finally able to get over this hump. And, it doesn't come to us as a surprise, but at the end of the day, for them to have a dominating postseason run, finishing with the record of 16-3, it's very, very impressive. So I say we just go ahead and jump right into it all. They won this series in 5 games, closed it out on their home floor, started out the series 3-0, winning 2 at home, won out the first game in Dallas, game 3. Dallas was able to fight back in game 4, but the Boston Celtics had one objective in game 5 and to close it out on their home floor, 106-88. So let's go ahead and just get our overall thoughts on this series as a whole. What were we thinking throughout from game to game, and just our final overview.
I mean, I had the Boston Celtics winning this in 5 pretty confidently. Like, I think people were a little bit too surface level with how they're talking about this series, saying, oh, well, the Dallas Mavericks have the best player in the series. And so, if they get into crunch time situations, it to me, never crossed my mind just because of how good the Celtics are all around. I mean, you have basically 5 top 50 level players in one lineup. That's just absurd. Even with Porzingis' injury, and we saw how great he came out in game 1, and then, he got re-injured in game 2, but he came out absolutely phenomenal. Every single guy on this lineup can contribute. And to me, the Dallas Mavericks defensive strategy all postseason long was, we're going to help off the bad shooters. We're going to stay away from the Lou Dorts of the world, the Josh Giddeys of the world, the hesitant shooters like the Terrence Manns. Some of those guys, they can hit threes here and there, but they're not going to absolutely kill you. And so that was kind of their mentality coming into the postseason, and it was paying off. They're destroying teams. In the Minnesota series, they had Gobert out there, and so they didn't have to do much. And so they're punishing bad offense. And then you come across the Celtics, who, to me, have a complete lineup of just shooters from top to bottom. I mean, you have guys coming off the bench to hit half-court shots. You have guys like Sam Hauser ready to hit threes. Every single person on this lineup can shoot, and they all can play defense. And so, to me, it was simple. The better team is gonna win the series. Like, to me, it wasn't even like a debate of who was the better team. It was just the guys that are more complete, and they have the personnel to guard each one of these guys. And Luka was gonna get his game off, in my opinion, regardless. But Kyrie, I mean, he just can't beat these Boston demons. They're just stuck in his head. Like, anytime he's been in Boston, anytime he faces players from Boston, it's just an issue. And I think it's more than just the crowd. I do think that he was a bit thrown off by the crowd and the cheering and all that stuff. But they have the personnel. Imagine you call for a switch and there's Drew Holiday there, and then you have Derek White there, and then you have Jaylen Brown, and then you have Jason Tatum. I mean, it's just hell. And so, Boston, it's just a complete team. And so I was pretty confident they're going to win the series, and they won pretty confidently.
Man, Boston. Like I'd said, a team that think they had 9 or 10 guys above 200 threes this year. I'm pretty sure. They at least had 3 or 4 bench players that were hitting threes, and
Eight players for sure.
8 players at least, and guys like Peyton Pritchard, multiple third quarter halftime buzzer beaters, or to end the quarter, he's hitting halftime big shots at the from long distance and stuff like that. You got Horford coming off the bench. Porzingis, the first 2 games while being healthy, he was hooping, and like I'd mentioned, Sam Hauser, another guy that can play the 3 and D role, him as well. So you got 9 guys on your roster that can, switch, play 5 out and everything. It was going to be tough on Dallas. I feel like Boston wanted to leave Derrick Jones Jr. open. They wanted to, test PJ Washington to see if they can continue that little hot streak that they had early on in the playoffs. And it worked. These guys were missing wide open threes that they were hitting in the OKC series and, the Minnesota series, but it couldn't get knocked down this final. So, another guy, Kyrie Irving, man. I thought Kyrie was going to come out finally, put this Boston show to the side and finally show up and hoop against them. And I felt like he was just in his head. I felt like the first 2 games he came out there and he couldn't get his shot off. He couldn't find rhythm. He couldn't. I felt like they were just in his head. And every time he come to the post game or post conference, he was always mentioning something about Boston this, Boston that, or I just got to find my rhythm and stuff like that. I just felt like you just got to go out there and hoop. So. We know Luka, one of the best players in the league. He came out. He was going to hoop regardless, but, that's not enough when you don't have anybody else helping you on the court. Your second best player, he's not showing up for majority of the series. And the role players that were showing up in the beginning of the playoffs and towards the end, they just suddenly faded off. So, I did expect Boston to win in 5. Didn't expect this much blowouts in some of the games and expected a lot more from Kyrie Irving, which was disappointing. But, shout out Boston. They came out. They did what they had to. They played the same type of basketball they've been playing all year long, and it didn't really switch. They hit all their threes. And you guys got, guys like JB, Derek White, Horford, hooping off the bench, and they're showing up. Although Tatum didn't have a really fantastic series, but a lot of the role players and everybody else, majority, showed up. So, been a long time for Boston.
I mean, just for me, I think I found it extremely weird how coming into this finals, a lot of sports media talking heads had the Dallas Mavericks winning this series, and their reasoning just never made sense to me. I did not want to see the Boston Celtics win the NBA championship, but at the same time, at the end of the day, I had to understand how great of a team they were. I mean, these guys won 64 games in the regular season. These guys just weren't coasting. These guys weren't no slouch in the Eastern Conference. They had that number 1 seed locked away by the time it was in January, and they didn't look back ever since. And yes, their track record in the last 16 years isn't the greatest. In these last 5 years, it hasn't been the greatest. But at the same time, it's like each and every single season has been extremely different for the Celtics team. And this year was really the year that they had to put it all together, which they did. But for the media folks to come out and say, the Dallas Mavericks are going to win this series in 7, they're going to have a hard time adjusting to Luka and Kyrie. They haven't played a scoring duo, a scoring punch like these 2 guys. I just never really bought into that. And normally in the finals, I would come with agendas. I would force myself to believe certain things. But these last couple of years, I've kind of removed myself from that type of conversation. My mindset has been a little bit different. I just started realizing, that normally the best team will always win, whether it's in dominating fashion, whether it's close, but normally the best team will always win. For the Boston Celtics, they've been dominant all year long, and they're going from the regular season to the postseason. Every time they would drop a game in the regular season, it felt like the world was ending. Everybody on social media was hating on them. They could lose a game to the Atlanta Hawks, and people will go crazy. Well, they're saying things like, this is who they really are. Come postseason time, they're going to crumble. They play the Miami Heat and play Jimmy Butler. They're going to do the same thing over and over again. I just didn't think that was going to be the case this year. If the Miami Heat had Jimmy Butler in that first round, I still believe the Boston Celtics would have won that series. It just would have been in a couple of more extra games being played. Then they ended up playing the Cleveland Cavaliers. Even if Donovan Mitchell was playing in that series for the whole series and Jared Allen, they were still going to end up winning that series in 5 games. And the Indiana Pacers, a very young team, a very fun team that came on the scene in the postseason. they were still going to end up sweeping those guys regardless, even though there was a couple of close games. Indiana had a couple of chances to win a couple of games, but the Boston Celtics were always a dominant team. So when it came to the finals, when it came to them matching up with the Dallas Mavericks, I just never really bought into them just losing this series. For me, it was just about how many games it was going to take. 5 games, and majority of them were unenjoyable. A lot of those games were 20-point blowouts. Outside of that game 4, where the Dallas Mavericks really blew them out. I mean, this doesn't come to me as a surprise whatsoever. You guys already highlighted, Kyrie Irving's struggles. Even Luka Doncic himself, even though he got his game off, it was an extreme struggle for him to do so. He got all the switches in the world that he wanted. The coverages that he kept getting against the Timberwolves in that Western Conference Finals, where they had troubles either switching off him or cutting or having Jaden McDaniels on his back, waiting for Gobert to come up on the screen. He was able to adjust to that and cook those guys, and then he got everything that he wanted on the offensive end and the offensive looks against the Celtics team. And the Celtics, they just stood their ground, whether it was him just going one-on-one with Jason Tatum, whether it was him going one-on-one with Al Horford. At the end of the day, the Boston Celtics had a game plan, and I have to give credit to Joe Mazzulla for that. Sticking with what's worked for him for the whole season and not necessarily crumbling it away and folding when the pressure got too high. The Boston Celtics were unfazed in this finals. Luka Doncic, Joe Mazzulla said it best. Those guys got Kyrie and Luka Doncic. Those guys are going to get their game off. No matter who's guarding them. It's just really all about limiting the guys around him. You guys mentioned it. Derek Jones Jr., PJ Washington. Who else was there? Gafford, Derek Lively on the low block in the dunker spot. If you take away all those other options, those guys aren't going to combine for 90 points to go ahead and beat you. And so, they held a lot of those guys in check, and with Kyrie struggling, it even made it harder for the Dallas Mavericks. And so, for the Dallas Mavericks, it's credit to them. I had my question marks about him in February. I won't forget this. I was a little bit confused as to where they were going with this. I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of the Kyrie Irving trade, but for the most part in the postseason, they kind of shut me up a little bit because they made the NBA Finals. There's not much I can really say about that. But now that they've gotten to the finals, we can go ahead and pivot into a different direction. What's next for this Dallas Mavericks team? You've gotten over the hump. When you first traded for Kyrie Irving, you missed the postseason. You were the conversation all summer long. You come back, you retooled this roster at the trade deadline, getting Derek Jones Jr., getting PJ Washington, getting Gafford. So you're able to retool this roster and get guys that fit well with the guys like Luka and Kyrie. You make the NBA Finals. You have a great run. The first round, the second round, you beat the Thunder. You beat the Timberwolves. Now you run into the Boston Celtics, who are just head and shoulders above waters and way better than you. How do you retool this roster even more, to get over the hump?
I think they already kind of built the foundation.
I think the foundation's there. For me,
you already have Luka and Kyrie there. So
go ahead. You get another. I think you get a similar type of guy coming off the bench, like a Malik Monk World type guy or another scorer that can step up and be that either third option or a second option, even if Kyrie or Luka, one of them have a bad game. I feel like they need that third type of option that can create and score for themselves. Like other than that, those are the only 2 players that can create and score for themselves. You guys got Gafford, PJ Washington, Lively, Hardaway Jr., Josh Green. There's a lot of players that, they need somebody to create for them, or they're just standstill shooters, or they're, pick and roll type players that just go for alley-oops. I feel like they do need that 6-man Malik Monk type person or another person on that lineup that can be that third option for them.
I think they have to kind of pivot into getting a more competent offensive player in replace of Derek Jones Jr. And I liked what Derek Jones Jr. provided for them in terms of defense and energy and the occasional corner 3 and being a lob threat with Luka. But I think that they can do better offensively in his place because, if you're not having a sort of volume or attacking player in that small forward position and you already have PJ Washington as the power forward, like you kind of need someone to kind of replicate some level of scoring to take off the load in those lineups next to Luka and Kyrie. Like I think, I've been seeing rumors of the Paul Georges or the Jeremy Grants or the Kyle Kuzmas or the Brandon Ingrams, just a competent small forward that's able to make plays next to those 2 in those lineups. And probably they do need, like Big A's mentioned, a backup, a scoring option. I do think like some sort of third ball handler, because if you go back to the regular season lineups, they had a lot of success with a guy like Dante Exum in those lineups next to Kyrie and Luka. And so if you kind of get a guy that's like a sort of a third ball handler, bench scoring piece. I think that's where it is. But to me, the main focus should be you can re-sign Derrick Jones Jr. for whatever, $13 million a year. I think they're fine with that. And then you get a sort of small forward or make a move for a small forward that can fit in those lineups next to those guys, whether it's Jeremy Grant or Brandon Ingram or Paul George, or try to figure out what lineups kind of work and figure out that small forward that they kind of need in terms of scoring. Because as you saw in the finals, if Kyrie and Luka, they're playing one-on-one on Luka, they're like, whatever, you can do you. And Kyrie was taking out the game, then who was taking off the scoring load? So I think that's kind of critical for them, getting some sort of scoring small forward.
So do you guys believe that, they're going to be once again going into next season? Are they going to be a championship contending team with the current roster as it is right now? Or this season, did you guys believe, or this postseason, did you guys believe that, they were just a team that got hot at the right time? I mean, they dominated the Timberwolves. We'll go ahead and give them that. And in that second round, that series really could have gone either way between them and the Oklahoma City Thunder. If SGA doesn't foul PJ Washington, we might be having a different conversation, but who knows? It's coulda, shoulda, woulda at this point.
To me, it's probably be the same again next year, because I don't think any team in the West is as stacked as Boston is. I don't think any team in the West is as deep as Boston.
I'm just saying in comparison to Boston, just Dallas as
a unit.
Yeah.
I think they can replicate what they did again this year.
I think the West gets better yearly, but at the same
because the West is extremely strong.
The West is extremely strong, and Dallas came out on top this year.
They can build some sort of continuity, from the start. They can have a good regular season from the jump, because after the trade deadline, they're arguably a top 2, top 3 team in the league with how they played. But I do think that they want to, have success in the postseason again, because going back to that OKC series, OKC is going to look at their lineup, and obviously evidenced by them going out.
OKC already made it. They already made a move.
Get Caruso, and so Minnesota is going to be looking to fix their offense. Denver is going to be looking to fix their bench, and no backup point guard and backup big. So obviously these teams are going to try to make marginal improvements, and some of these art styles make fights. Do I think Dallas would have beaten a healthy Denver team this year? I don't think so personally, but at the same time, all these teams make marginal improvements. So I think you can't get complacent with what you have.
Yeah. I feel like.
But they do come in the West as a top 3 team. To be honest,
yeah, for sure, they're a top 3, top 4 team in the West. I just think that if they do make those additions early on in free agency this year and stuff like that, they're gonna be a team to contend with.
For me, just my whole issue is just the West. They get every team in the West gets better, and when you look at the West this year in specific, every team, a lot of the teams that were in the top half were extremely strong. And the Dallas Mavericks, they were just a team that was there, but I just don't know, man. I just don't know if they're gonna be able to have a postseason run like this. They can retool the roster. The talks with Paul George getting a third scorer, to fill that forward position could potentially help. But with how stacked the Western Conference is, it's, for me, I lean more towards them just getting hot at the right time. But credit to them, at the trade deadline, they did make some good moves that got some key contributors from those from the trade market with PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, to help retool this roster going into the postseason. And so it's going to be interesting to see for me, because the West is so tough each and every year. It's always competitive. It's a lot stronger than the Eastern Conference. And so for the Boston Celtics, we can expect them to be back. But for the Dallas Mavericks, I can't necessarily put a pin to it right now and be confident about it. But aside from the Dallas Mavericks, another conversation that I want to move towards is Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, the whole debate going on around there. I understand that Jaylen Brown did win the Eastern Conference Finals MVP award. He won the NBA Finals MVP award. But this was Jason Tatum's moment. Jason Tatum coming into this finals, coming off of the last one in 2022, where he didn't necessarily perform to his standard, to his level of play, had an opportunity to shut all the haters up. And he was able to only average 22.7 rebounds and 7 assists, which is good numbers. But at the same time, when we think about Jason Tatum and we label him as a superstar, which I've always, have been a big fan about, putting up those numbers aren't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily look great to me. And so, do you guys think Jason Tatum did enough in this NBA Finals to shut up his haters, or does he have to continue to do more in the upcoming season and to really silence all the doubt and all the haters around him.
I mean, I feel like the conversation around him will always be a bit sometimes unfair to him, sometimes fair. Like I think it is fair to question about his offensive game, consistency wise. I do think for some weird reason he hit a kind of a crazy slump in the playoffs in terms of his jump shot coming into the season. The last 2 years, I think he's been a really damn good, almost to me like a top 6 level player during the regular season. Last year, I think he was top 5. This year, a little bit of a drop off just because of how good the team got and his stats kind of went down. But I think these playoffs, I think they kind of showed another side to Jason Tatum that the casual fans don't necessarily appreciate in terms of like his versatility. I mean, the fact that you can live with Jason Tatum guarding opposition fives, and you can live with him switching out, and you can live with him doing different things, almost operating as like a 4 or 5. I think those are things that just kind of contribute to how good I think he is as a player. But at the same time, you're playing in the most optimal offensive situation with a 5-out team, and you're still having issues, picking apart defenses. I think that's fair for people to keep questioning. And I think that's why, to me, outside of anyone living in Boston, I don't see Jason Tatum as a top 5 player. I just don't think that's possible at this current moment with how he is as an offensive player. But I do think people are going a little harsh saying, he's still not a top 10 player. Like, that's a bit OD to me, especially with how much he does in terms of the little things. And so I wouldn't say he has done enough to shut the haters up. And to me, some of them probably won't be satisfied with him just because of how good the Boston Celtics are as a team. But he could have done more because obviously he didn't win the Finals MVP. And we know why, because he should have been better, but he could have done more.
He could have done more. I feel like offensively, obviously the playmaking part that he did, was okay, and the rebounding was stuff like that. But 22 points to be named or to be in conversations in the top 5 conversation, I need to see more on that. And he shot pretty bad. I feel like he's so committed to that jump shot, that mid-range shot, that step back shot that he's very committed to. I feel like, he's going away from what his game truly was, attacking the rim, being aggressive, and then settling in for that jump shot. And I feel like he just gets settled into that jump shot too much right now, and it kind of affects him. But, they won the finals. They easily walked through, but for him to be in that top 5 conversation, I need you to come out. I need you to dominate in fashion, and I need you to be the best player on the court on both sides of the ball and on both sides of both teams. And to me, he really didn't show that. I felt like him and Jaylen Brown were equally that. They played equal. They had equally the same performances, and I felt like MVP could have went both ways, but 21 points. 21 points, very, very big drop off from your season total. And I mean, you do have a stacked team, but still, though, to me, I feel like he has to show better. That's 2 finals in a row that he's played in, and he hasn't performed as well as people thought that he was supposed to perform, even in the late rounds of the playoffs as well. But we'll see next year.
The Boston Celtics winning the championship wasn't necessarily the biggest problem to me, but the nail in the coffin would have been a Jason Tatum Finals MVP, and I'm extremely glad that he didn't live up to the expectations. He didn't play up to his standard, because that would have changed the whole dynamic of the conversation surrounding him. They would have put him in conversations, amongst the top guys in the league with Joel Embiid's and Nikola Jokic's and the Giannis's of the world. And I wasn't really ready for that type of conversation. So I'm glad that he didn't win the Finals MVP. But just my whole issue with Jason Tatum is just that I understand that rebounding and playmaking is a part of the game and playing defense is a part of the game. But when you want to be alongside the top guys in the top 5 in all of basketball, you got to be able to play up to that type of standard, at a top 5 level all throughout. His shooting splits 38% from the field, 26% from the 3-point line, and 92% from the free throw line, 50% true shooting percentage. I mean, it's just that's an extreme drop off for a superstar. That's something you don't necessarily expect from top guys. If guys like LeBron, KD, Steph, Giannis, Jokic, Embiid, if those guys did all that in the NBA Finals, like the whole conversation from the end of that Finals all the way into the beginning of the NBA season would be just surrounding those guys, and their choke jobs in the postseason, and especially in the Finals. We don't necessarily expect those type of numbers from those guys. Those guys would be getting crucified for it. We wouldn't hear the end of it. And so for Jason Tatum, I think, of course, he definitely didn't silence the haters for me, because I've always stood on the fact that when we start labeling guys superstars too early, I'm not comfortable with that. And I think that's what we did with a guy like Jason Tatum. And we labeled him a superstar too early. And I feel like now he's coming to himself. He's coming into the league now, year in and year out as a superstar. No doubt about that. But at the end of the day, you got to show me on the biggest stage in the postseason throughout. He had his moments going up and down. For me, it's about showing a true level of consistency. And I think that's what's lacking for Jason Tatum. And, he's looking like he's having the same kind of trajectory that Steph Curry had in the beginning of when he started to pop off in 2015, 2014, where, some of the performances were there. But at the end of the day, when the chips are all there and the lights are the brightest and you got to show up and perform, the numbers don't necessarily match your level, your standard, your level of play throughout. And so, I didn't have an issue with Jaylen Brown winning whatsoever. I think, the debate really could have gone either way. Jason Tatum did look like he wanted to win that Finals MVP with the way he was playing in Game 5, looking to close out the Dallas Mavericks as a whole. But when you look at the body of work throughout the whole Finals, it was evident that Jaylen Brown did have a better series, especially on both sides of the ball. It looked like Luka was hunting Jason Tatum on the offensive end, and he was having a lot of success there going forward. And so, it's going to take another season. And, as a whole for the Boston Celtics, Jason Tatum even said it himself. He said that, people aren't going to give him credit for this type of run that they went on, finishing the postseason 16-3. It's no easy footing. It's not done. They're one of the most dominant teams ever in NBA history. They would probably rank top 3 somewhere, dating back to when the Warriors went 16-1 in their postseason run, first year with Kevin Durant, or actually second year with Kevin Durant. And so, from here on out, it's just now the conversation that we should probably be having is, do we believe that the Boston Celtics are the NBA's next dynasty? And I know we had this conversation last year when the Denver Nuggets were the reigning champs, or when they were crowned the champions and they won their series in 5. And when we throw the word dynasty around, it's not a word that you should be throwing around too lightly or too loosely. But with the way the Boston Celtics are set up and the way they're built, I think it's fair to, raise the question.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie. Potentially just because of, I think this Boston team to me is better than that 23 Nuggets team, honestly. And I get there's clear levels of difference between their best player and the Celtics' best player, but I mean, they're gonna plan on re-signing Derek White. They're gonna lose a part of their bench, just because of the salary cap and whatnot. But I mean, they're still gonna retain their main core of players, and as long as they have those set of guys, the thing is though with them, one injury doesn't necessarily mean the death of them if it's not their top 2 guys. We saw Porzingis, got injured, and he's been critical to how they play their offense. They just kept moving. They kept it pushing. If Jrue Holiday ended up getting injured, I mean, they're on to the next guy. They're able to kind of facilitate and kind of move on. And so I do see the potential for a dynasty just because of, how structured and how good they are. And I trust, you could trust a guy like Brad Stevens to build the correct team and, make the marginal improvements. We saw how ruthless he was, getting a guy like Marcus Smart out of there, who's a culture changer, and getting in a guy like Porzingis. And so I think they have, after last year, I kind of do want to be a little bit more tight about using the word dynasty. But I mean, to be honest, they have the makings of one with how good their team is in general.
Dynasty. It's crazy. I don't know yet. Like we said that early on with the Nuggets. We kind of mentioned them, say that, they might be the dynasty. No team can stop them in the West, yada, yada, yada. Jokic is too dominant, everything like that. They do have, I agree with them on the part that Boston is more tooled to go back-to-back than Denver was this up last year. And I feel like, the main core, if they can keep the main 7 or 8 guys that they have, including you got the starting 5 and Horford off the bench. Who else is coming off the bench? They can keep Horford, Pritchard, and everybody else. Was it Hauser? Those are the 3 main guys off the bench, if I'm pretty sure.
Yep.
Yeah, if they can keep those 3 and then the 5, it's going to be very, very tough to stop them. It's going to be very tough to stop them. So, do I feel like it's a dynasty? I feel like we gotta wait till next year and see how other teams shape up in the East, and if other teams Philly make adjustments, or New York they pick up additions, or Miami makes some adjustments, or even teams like the Cavs or Indiana, they get better. So who knows what can happen? But they are told to go back to back, and we'll see.
Because I'm looking at the payroll right now, and they re-signed Drew Holiday this year. They gave him an extension. Kristaps Porzingis, he's not off the books until the end of 2025 and 2026. And so when you look at it for next year, for the 2024-2025 season, they're pretty much going to have that core intact. Derek White is under contract up until the end of next season. Horford is under contract up until the end of next season. And so now when you look at it, you do make a fair point. If it's not Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown going out with an injury, any other guy that gets injured on this team, they can slot in somebody else that can't necessarily replicate what that person does, but it can kind of keep the system flowing, because you just want to keep the machine going. You don't want the machine to be stopped for repair. You don't want the show to stop. As long as you have Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown out there, the show will continue to keep going on, and they'll be able to do what they're supposed to be doing. And so they got another crack at it next year. But for me, when I think about the word dynasty, man, for me, it's always too early when to bring up a conversation like that after a team wins one chip. You start bringing up dynasties when they continue to win at least more than one. When you get to that second one, and you do it in the same dominating fashion as you did the one before, and you continue to have a lot of the regular season success that you've had the year before, then that's when the conversation seems to be a lot more fair, and it's to be had, because you want to be able to bring up that type of conversation when you have all the facts and on all the history on your side, that everything, all the successes that you've had and you've shown in the last 2 years, and you put that all on the table. Then you there's no reason for people to deny you that you guys are a dynasty. But for teams to just win one and to not just go back, like how we witnessed with the Denver Nuggets and how they ended up losing to a team that was built perfectly to beat them, then things like that just happen in the NBA, man. So it's just tough for people it's tough to go back to the finals. So it's tough to go back and win the finals, let alone because now with the way the league has gone, ever since the Golden State Warriors dynasty days with Kevin Durant and LeBron James in the Eastern Conference, we haven't had a team go back to back in the championship since those times, and that was before we got into 2020, and it's 2018 since that was the last time we had a team go back to back in the finals. And so for the Boston Celtics, they'll have this core intact, and I'm sure they'll try to give this thing one more crack before. And Derek White will end up getting a contract probably. There's no doubt about that. Are there any teams in the Eastern Conference that can contend with these guys? I understand that the East was completely shattered. A whole lot of injuries going around when starting off with the Bucks with Giannis and Dame, and you go with the Miami Heat with Jimmy Butler, the New York Knicks specifically with OG getting injured, and you had Josh Hart getting injured. You had Jalen Brunson. You also had Julius Randle who didn't show up due to an injury. And the Pacers are a young team, but I can't put them in that group just yet. But and Joel Embiid, dealing with his injuries. What is it going to take for these teams in the Eastern Conference to compete with a team like the Boston Celtics? So that way, we don't necessarily see the same team over and over and over again.
Honestly, bro, I really think the Knicks healthy would have done more damage against this team than the Mavericks did, to be honest. Just because of, for one, they're a lot more physical than a team like Dallas. And I don't think that people really realize is Jason Tatum kind of covers up how ass Boston is at rebounding. They're not a great rebounding team in general. And so the Knicks put a lot of pressure on you with the offensive glass and their physicality. And a guy like Jalen Brunson is just a better scorer than Kyrie Irving is. Especially against physicality. He's not going to get bothered by a guy like Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum or Derek White. It's going to be a little bit more of a battle against Jrue Holiday just because Jrue Holiday is insanely strong. But even then, Jalen's going to get his game off compared to someone like Kyrie. He's going to give you a high scoring floor. And then Julius Randle, I think this would have been the playoffs Julius Randle really fixes up because he kind of shifted his shot diet. He's not checking up these long twos no more. He was kind of getting straight to the rim. He was shooting a lot more threes. And so he was fixing up his game. And then, of course, we saw Dante DiVincenzo and his improvement. We saw all these Josh Hart. We saw a bunch of contributors on this team. And then, of course, they have bodies. They have guys like OG Anunoby there as well. And so I feel like this team healthy, would have done a lot more damage than a team like the Mavericks did. And so for the Knicks, I think it's just marginal improvements. Maybe they could flip Randall, but even then, I think that they can just go out, sign a actual, like maybe another small forward or another wing, or go out and kind of clean up the bench a little more. Um, just because the reason why I'm saying that is because you kind of don't know Randall's value yet in the playoffs. Yeah, you have history of it, but now now he was kind of like on a trajectory where it was like, oh, maybe he might have a good postseason, and of course he got injured. I mean, the team, I think their record was what 16-3 when healthy. I forgot. They're basically dominant when the entire lineup was healthy, and so they saw that and they're probably thinking, okay, let's go back to that. And so I'd like to see the Knicks compete again as a fully healthy team when they re-sign OG. For the Pacers, they were the toughest team that the Celtics faced, and so for them, I think it's a matter of you got to get some sort of wing, whether it's like a Mikal Bridges or some sort of player in that mold. Just get another defensive wing that can score. Someone like I really do think Mikal would be a great fit. Jimmy Butler would be the most ideal, but I don't think at this point he's going to be in Indiana. But go for some sort of defensive wing, get a backup five. For the Philly, they're chasing Paul George, but they might be moving on. So I do think some teams can make moves. For Boston, it's really styles. You got to be physical. You have to have the key to beat Boston is size and post ups. That's why Denver would have been a bad matchup for them because you have KP and Al Horford there. They're just not good defenders like that. I think KP is an amazing rim protector, but he's not a good defender. I wouldn't consider him an elite defender. And so size and post ups make the difference. And so these top three teams that I mentioned can, have an effect on Boston. So those are kind of the teams that I see. If they make some sort of improvement, they can put pressure on Boston.
For sure. New York was one of the teams that, I always mentioned that if they faced Boston healthy, I feel like they would have given them a lot of problems, just the physicality wise and the style of play that they play and the bully ball and how much, defensively and offensively more they want it for the 50-50 balls and the scrappy style that they bring to the court. And I've been, a big advocate of Jalen Brunson this whole year. I feel like, he's this year, I feel like he was a top 10 player this year, especially that second half when Randall went down. That second half of the season, the way he was performing and playing, he was very unguardable, very unguardable. And, every time they get a new injury, there was always another guy stepping up, whether it be Dante, whether it be Hart, whether it be Harstein, whether it be McBride. It was always the next guy mentality. And I wish I could have seen this team, come into this playoffs healthy and, with the full lineup of, Randall, OG fully healthy, Mitch Robb coming off the bench. You don't need Harstein playing 45, 46 minutes a game. And, just, everybody healthy. Even Bogdanovich, if he was healthy too, they could have had another option there. I felt like they were a very deep team. And that they could have caused a lot of problems for Boston. They could have went 9-man, 10-man rotations and physically attack Boston, physically attack Tatum and Brown, make them work for their buckets and stuff like that. And could have gone 7, but I feel like, for me, mainly New York. I would love to say Philadelphia, but man, Embiid in his playoff woes, whether it be he's fighting multiple injuries or, him not showing up sometimes or Tobias Harris not doing shit and Maxey not playing well the last couple of games of the playoffs and stuff like that,
Tobias is a free agent, though. Just letting y'all know that.
I'm glad he's leaving Philadelphia.
They're free of him, so.
Man, he making 185 mil off that contract and me and him doing the same thing. It's crazy. It's crazy, to come out multiple games in the series, have less than 4 points, have less than 6 points, not even perform, not even play defense, have 2-3 rebounds, and you're the starting power forward. To me, that's wild. But Philadelphia, if they can get Paul George, I feel like they in the prime perfect position. Although, can we trust PG in the playoffs? That's another guy that I know going into the playoffs, I know what he's bringing to the table, and I can't can we really trust him to show up? So. And then maybe Milwaukee. I hear in the rumbles that they do want to kind of fix the roster to assimilate more to Dame and Giannis. They kind of want to get rid of Brook. Here they, Doc Rivers might want to just put Giannis at the 5 and try to see how the floor can stretch like that and get another smaller, a 3-and-D guy at that 4 position, somebody that can stretch the floor even more. I feel like defensively they gotta get a defensive guard to help, pick up that assignment of that backcourt. We can't trust Dame. We can't trust Malik Beasley. Is Beasley on the team? He was their starting shooting guard this year, right?
Is he a
Beasley?
Yeah. Is he a
Yeah,
free agent?
He's probably a free agent now.
I
For
think he's
sure.
probably a free agent.
Yeah,
But
that's been a guy who's been roaming around the league for years now.
and then another thing for me from Milwaukee, I think it's time to start trying to dangle Chris Middleton into those trade talks. Try to get him off your roster. Try to see if you can get an upgrade in that position. So now his knee's shredded. And he's 50% the player he was when he was playing in that finals that they won. So for me, I feel like Milwaukee, if they can upgrade around Giannis and Dame, to me those would be the three teams that can compete against Boston. I still feel like Indiana's young though.
This is how I look at it, and this will probably be the last thing I say before we close it out. In this upcoming free agency window that's going to be coming up real soon in the next couple of weeks, I don't have my eyes on star players moving around whatsoever when it comes to the Eastern Conference and these teams that you've mentioned. I got my eyes on all these general managers and all the higher ups for each and every single one of these franchises, because this is how I look at it. When we look at the Western Conference and we look at all the top teams and their roster construction, what makes those guys, what makes their teams, so great in comparison to teams like in the Eastern Conference? Because obviously the West is so stacked, and there's a reason for that. There's the Eastern Conference has star power. They have players that are in the top 5 and the top 10 lists for the NBA. They have a lot of those guys coming from the Eastern Conference as well as the Western Conference. But what separates teams from in the West from teams in the East? And for me, it's the general managers and their eagerness and their hunger and their drive to make moves. A team that I'm gonna put under the spotlight right now, the Oklahoma City Thunder. They lost in the second round. They were a team that was projected that exceeded their expectations and exceeded their projections. And before the free agency window even opened up, after losing to the Dallas Mavericks, what did they do the last couple of days? They traded for Alex Caruso and got Josh Giddey off their books. Josh Giddey was their Achilles heel, the guy that was holding them back all season long, struggling how to play him and how to use him in the postseason. And Sam Presti said, Josh, it's good. You were good for us, but you're no longer a part of this team. You don't fit our style. You don't fit our identity. They went ahead and got Alex Caruso, who's on an expiring contract, but it's still a great move because now they have another perimeter defender, an all NBA level defender to guard these tough guys and these tough scorers that we have in the Western Conference. So now you put Caruso, you put Lou Dort on the floor at the same time. It's going to be shackles for anybody's backcourt. And you think about the Minnesota Timberwolves and their roster construction to beat a team like the Denver Nuggets, who were looking like they were going to be the NBA's next dynasty. They built twin towers in the paint for Jokic with Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns and Naz Reid, and they were successful with their superstar and the up and coming superstar in Anthony Edwards. So when I look at teams in the Eastern Conference, and the New York Knicks have shown me the most so far with what I'm talking about, with making moves that help your team. It doesn't necessarily mean go out and be the Phoenix Suns and go out and acquire 3 superstars, because that hasn't gone well for them whatsoever so far. Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, that pairing last season was okay, but it wasn't enough to get him over the hump. They added Bradley Beal into the mix, and it wasn't necessarily a great season for them whatsoever. They got swept off the floor in the first round by a team that was well constructed in the Minnesota Timberwolves. And so for the Eastern Conference, if you want to be able to compete and have the same level of consistency as the Boston Celtics, it all starts with the GMs, because players move around all the time. There's no doubt about that. Superstars go from the East Coast to the West Coast. That's just how the game is. But at the same time, these GMs need to put their focus on constructing the best roster possible. And it doesn't mean, oh, I want to go ahead and slap 3 superstars on the same team and build a super team, or I'm going to try to just get these guys that you could just slot in here every now and then that'll give you some regular season success, but in the postseason they're going to be on the bench for me. It's just the game just doesn't work like that. The Boston Celtics have had an identity for years now, which is why we've been seeing them in the Eastern Conference Finals and in the finals for the last 5 years. 2 finals appearances, multiple ECF appearances, and that's all because of their roster construction and what they built for years. And it's been years in the works for these guys. And so for me, these guys having so much success doesn't come to me as a surprise, because they've been working so hard at trying to build an identity with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum have been in conversations for years now about whether or not they should split them up, especially coming off of last year, where they went down 3-0 to the Miami Heat and they were almost able to come back, but still just came up a little bit short. And so, for the New York Knicks, it comes down to, are you guys going to be able to bring back Hartenstein and bring back OG? For the Milwaukee Bucks, You guys need perimeter defenders. You let your best perimeter defender go to the reigning champions now in the Boston Celtics. Is it a move that you look back on right now and are happy about? Absolutely not. But you wanted Damian Lillard, and you knew wherever you traded Drew Holiday to, he was going to get bought out. And the Boston Celtics were the best buyers. They were able to pick him up, and they gave him an extension. And then now you look at other teams like the Cleveland Cavaliers. What are you going to do with that Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland backcourt? Has it worked for you? You guys have to every GM in the Eastern Conference, they just have to reevaluate where they are as a franchise right now and use the Boston Celtics as the bar. You want to be able to be on their level. How do we get to their level? And so, the Pacers, they're a team that's going to be able to make a lot of moves in this upcoming offseason. They know exactly what they need. Now it's about whether going out and getting those type of guys. They need rebounding. They need another big. They need a perimeter defender, just like a guy like OG, who they're in talks with as well. There's rumors circulating around that. And, you also need to be able to get more scores. I know Benedict Mathurin was injured this year, but you still need to be able to retool that roster. And so for a lot of these teams, it all comes down to the GMs and how aggressive they are in the free agency window. How aggressive are they in the trade deadline window? Because if you're not going to be aggressive, if you're not going to swing for the fences, if you're not going to do your work early, then at the end of the day, you're just not going to be able to compete. Don't be surprised in the postseason when you lose to the Boston Celtics in 5 and just be like, okay, well, Boston was a great team. Because at the end of the day, the Boston Celtics were just like you 5-6 years ago. They didn't have an identity. They didn't know where they were going as a franchise, but they came in with a plan and they executed it perfectly. And so that's my final thoughts on pretty much this whole conversation about.
I think also it doesn't to be honest, you just have to build your roster to the best ability of their strengths. Like for example, the Dallas Mavericks, the fact that you have Luka Doncic already gives you a high floor as an offensive team. And then you have Kyrie Irving, who fits like a glove. I feel like a lot of these GMs just need to understand that there's not a ton of complex moves that you need to do. Cause Boston has built its system on the fact that they don't necessarily have a floor setter. They don't have a point guard. Their two best players are two wings that aren't necessarily high level playmakers, but you surround them with shooting and they're already defenders in of themselves, that you don't have to worry about as much as the offensive process for them versus the Dallas Mavericks, where your two best players are your two offensive players. And so from there, you can just build out your roster with just shooting and defense. Derek Jones, they did a great job with Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington. That's a great starting point. Now you just target another type of small forward. For OKC, well, your best player gets to the rim basically every time, and he's a high-level scorer. He's a guaranteed 30 every single night. You have a scoring anchor, essentially. From there, how do we build out this roster? You already have a bunch of defensive versatility. Well, now all you need to do is get a high-level shooter, high-volume shooter to fix over those issues. And so, I think Boston kind of got lucky being able to have a guy like Drew Holiday and Porzingis in their lineup. But, I don't know, kind of just branching off, do we see the Celtics as an all-time team? If you just go based off the metrics and if you go based on the lineup, would you consider them an all-time team? And
hell no.
I mean, the ratings and stuff suggest it, but when I watch them, I feel like they are kind of a beatable team. They're not. They're very hard to beat. They're very hard to beat. Don't get me wrong, but they are a beatable team. I do think that you can take advantage of certain holes in them, and I feel like the teams that they were matched up against didn't necessarily have. I want to say they didn't necessarily have the pieces to take advantage of the holes in Boston's roster. That's kind of how I see it.
I do not think this is an all-time team, regardless of the metrics and numbers and just the eye test. The way they went through the East they lost how many games in the East? 1 or 2? They lost
3.
to the Cavs. 3.
Two. In the East, 2.
Yeah, it was. I feel like they went through an injury plagued East. They really didn't see Miami. I feel like Miami is the one team that puts the fear into their hearts when they're healthy. I feel like Jimmy Butler, he owns them, and he owns Drew Holiday. I feel like Miami was healthy if they had Hero healthy, if they had Rozier healthy, and if they had Butler healthy. That 1 in 8th, it would have been a completely different type of game.
I'll be honest, that's straight belt to ass. The only reason why I say straight belt to ass,
I don't think so. You've been saying that the last 4 years.
If Porzingis
y'all been
is healthy,
fighting him every year.
If Porzingis is healthy, that's straight belt to ass. That's a big reason why they got Porzingis and that's why Porzingis kind of destroyed the Mavericks in game 1 is the guy kills zones. He's a zone killer. The fact that he's a stretch big that can shoot is just he opens up the floor at a different level. Miami's zone has caused Tatum and Brown, especially a guy like Jaylen Brown, a lot of issues. and their ability to kind of like fill in the gaps, and force them to be playmakers kind of kills them. But like Porzingis just stretches out the floor so much that it's just like now they're kind of on a different plane. When that's why it's like when Porzingis plays, they're just a different team. They're like a different team when Porzingis plays. That's just kind of how I see it.
I don't know, man. I feel like Jimmy, to me, he puts fear into their hearts. And if you don't have Tatum and Brown showing up, it's gonna be very tough. I mean, Porzingis, to me, I still think Porzingis, he's a great player. Obviously, he's a great addition to that team. But the physicality wise, I just feel like Miami would have done something different. I felt like they would have done something different. But yeah, I mean, Porzingis did take this team to another level, though.
I mean, I would honestly lean more towards them being an all-time team because I look at it like this: agendas aside, the fear factor, the Miami Heat aside, regardless, it didn't matter who the Boston Celtics matched up with in this postseason. They were going to beat each and every one of those guys. It was just, like I said in the beginning of our episode, it was just a matter of how many games it was going to take. Was it going to be in this dominating fashion? Absolutely not. They probably would have dropped a couple of more games, but nothing too crazy, nothing to a crazy extent. What they only dropped 2 in the Eastern Conference, probably would have gone up to maybe 4 or 5 at the most. These guys were just so extremely dominant. And what's kind of scary when you really put it into perspective is offensively, they still can get better from here. Because I wouldn't necessarily say they were at their best offensively throughout this entire postseason. What really held them down was them just having an elite defense. When we talk about defenses, the Minnesota Timberwolves, they showcased an elite performance on the defensive side up until they ran into the Dallas Mavericks. But for the Boston Celtics, they were the best defensive team in all of basketball from the regular season and to the postseason. And so for them, their defense is going to be the exact same. There's nothing that's going to really change on that side of the ball. They have their identity set. And that identity goes all the way back to Ime Udoka in January of 2022, where he told these guys, if you want to be great, if you want to, achieve greatness, you got to be able to play on both sides of the ball. And defensively, they've been great ever since. And so defensively, they're going to be the same team. Offensively, there's another level that they can hit, and it's the honest truth. And we just have to be real with ourselves sometimes when we talk about the Celtics team. They can be extremely better. Jason Tatum can be better. If this is Jason Tatum at his worst, I can only imagine how good Jason Tatum can be when he's at his best offensively, because Jaylen Brown can show flashes, but Jason Tatum is your superstar. That's the guy that's going to bring it home and be the number one for you. And so he can change the whole conversation if his level of play goes up. And if his level of play goes up, along with his rebounding and his playmaking, how much better can the Boston Celtics get, when you really think about it like that? And so I lean more towards them being an all-time team. Are they a beatable team? Yeah, I mean, a lot of great teams are beatable teams. I mean, the last true dominant team that we've seen were the KD Warriors, and that wasn't necessarily fun. I mean, we were coming into the NBA season saying the Golden State Warriors are going to win the championship. We're just watching basketball just to watch basketball. I don't think we get that same type of feeling when we watch the Boston Celtics. I think, it's going to be competitive basketball, but we know Boston's dominance now. So now moving forward, it's going to be, the Boston Celtics are going to be around what team is going to step up to the plate and knock these guys off. And so that's just how I really look at the whole situation, because the Boston Celtics are always going to be around. And when we talk about all-time teams, the record for this year proves it. But what will put the stamp on it is how they come out next year. And if they're able to hit their ceiling and their true ceiling offensively, it's going to be a completely different conversation. And that's what separates these guys from every other team in the Eastern Conference and alongside a lot of other teams in the Western Conference, because, the matchup, if you're able to figure out, if you're able to attack what they're weak at, which you mentioned, which is their rebounding and their size, you might have some success. But there's just not a lot of teams that are going to go ahead and find themselves, big men like Jokic and Embiid, lying around. Those are once in a lifetime talents. And if you're not able to exploit the Boston Celtics weaknesses, then I'm sorry, you're just going to have a tough time just beating these guys. And so, for the Boston Celtics, man, these guys are going to be here for a long, long time, just based on the fact that, this has been in the works for years now. And them getting lucky on getting Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown in back-to-back drafts in the same spot. Sometimes that's just how the cookie crumbles and things just fall into your lap, and that's how franchises are made. That's how dynasties are built. The Golden State Warriors is another one another similar franchise where, you know, they drafted a lot of their guys, you know, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green. Those guys aren't guys they got out in the free agency market. They drafted those guys and they developed those guys into who they are today. And the Boston Celtics are doing something very similar to that right now. You know, so for me, the one question that I would have was, do you guys believe that who do you guys think would win in the series right now? This current Celtics team or that 2022 Warriors team that ran into a similar team like this with Marcus Smart in replacement for Jrue Holiday and then no Kristaps Porzingis?
This Boston team, I'd be pretty confident about it, just because I think Tatum and Brown are both better as players. Like, I think that series really signified to them, like Jaylen Brown. I remember earlier in the year where he was talking with Draymond, he said, "You guys came with us with force, and so, you know, we weren't ready that time, but we're ready now." And, you know, a lot of that series kind of helped them fix a lot of playmaking issues. There's still some that remain for a guy like Jaylen Brown, but even he's improved at that aspect. And like you mentioned, they have Jrue Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis now, which is just makes them a different level of a team. So,
Man, Curry was a dog that finals. I feel like Curry and Wiggins, they really showed up that finals. Especially Wiggins, the way he was playing defensively on Tatum and Brown. But like I've said before, Porzingis really, he takes his team over the top. They're just the addition of Porzingis and then having Holiday. I really think they take it. Even if Tatum and Brown both perform the way they performed this finals against that Warriors team, I still think they come out on top and win.
Yeah, that's just been a conversation that's been on my mind for the last couple of days. But I would probably lean towards Boston as well. But with that being said, though, you know, any final words? I've put all my thoughts on the table. I got nothing left.
man, it ain't fun seeing this team win. I'll tell you that.
Fuck Boston. I always been fuck Boston. I never liked Boston. I hope they go on another 17-year drought.
It's going to be a long time until those guys go on a drought like that again, man. But you know, that comes with that being said, that's the NBA season is officially coming to a close. You know, what's next for us? You know, we got the NBA draft coming up real soon. We got NBA free agency that's going to be opening up real soon in a week and a half. So there's a lot that's got to be talked about in the NBA scene. And then once we get past those things, we got the NFL season right around the corner. It's only about a month and some change away before training camp opens up. And of course, we'll be here to talk about it all. But with that being said, we'll go ahead and close out this episode here. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. We appreciate your love and support. We'd greatly appreciate it if you like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at New Media Podcast. And for those of you that are watching us on YouTube, all of our social media handles will be at the end of this video. And if you're listening to us on Apple and Spotify, if you go to our Instagram page at New Media Podcast, you'll be able to navigate yourself to all of our social media handles there. So once again, we're glad to be back. We're happy to be back. Thank you so much for tuning in. And of course, we'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Record a new hit, then we making us a film. Wouldn't sign a deal if I got a couple mil. Been in the lab, now they throwing out deals. Me and now Lakes, now that's overkill.